Today we're going to be doing a vehicle inspection on a Wireline truck with air brakes. When you first walk up to a vehicle, you're going to be looking at the leaning and possibly if there's leaks. So you want to be able to look underneath to the side to see maybe if it's leaning, or to the other side, which could be possible suspension, tires, or just a general body damage that might arise. So first we're going to pop the hood and look at the internals by the engine and look for fluids, steering, and suspension components. So once the hood latches are up, pull the hood up nicely so the hood doesn't slam. And we're going to start on this passenger side. So the first thing I'm going to look at, I'm going to work from top to bottom. One, I don't see anything cracked or broken on the windshield. It looks like my windshield wipers are in place. I'm going to look at the air cleaner, make sure it's fastly tightened, and the plumbing that goes down into the turbo. One thing I like to do is always shake and grab things so I get a better feel of if it's loose or damaged. On the turbo, you're going to want to see if there's any black soot, black marks that might be leaking out. That will be the cause of an exhaust leak. Also, this is my alternator. I want to make sure there's no white marks or black marks. White marks could be corrosion and cause battery failure, and or if there's black marks, you could have a loose connection. I want to check my belt, make sure it has good tension and that it's not cracked, ripped, chafed, or anything. I want to look at my tensioner and that it's tensioned. I'm also going to look at coolant lines, my electrical lines and air lines, to make sure that they're not cut, chafed, or there could get a rub spot to be able to have a leak or some other kind of failure. I'm also going to look at my brake pod up front. I'm going to make sure that the air line's not touching anything, that it's securely fastened, and that my slack adjuster has its cotter pins and it's not loose. I will also give it a good tug to make sure it's not out of range. You want no more than a 1 inch, optimally ½ inch of free play on that slack adjuster. With that, I'm going to look at my suspension, the springs, the spring hangers. They could be cast or steel. The U-bolts that are attached, and if there's any shiny or parts like that, if there's any shininess, that could mean there's something loose or broken. I'm going to look at my shock, make sure it's securely fastened, and if there's no oil leaking out of it. If there's oil leaking out of it, that could be a cause of a worn seals on the inside. I'm also going to look at my tires. Your front tires can have no less than 4/32 of an inch. You want to look for irregular wear. You want to look for cuts in the sidewall, any bulging, or possible damage to the rim. You want to actually physically touch your lug nuts and see if they're loose or that they might be missing. You want to look at your hubcap right here and make sure there's fluid at the proper fill level. If you can't see fluid, you're most likely low and need to get it repaired. You want to make sure part of the body, the fenders, are securely attached, and that all your lights around here have no broken or missing parts on them. You want to look at your bumper, make sure it's securely fastened, and then also just checking for any leaks that might arise. And from here, if there's nothing, we'll check our fluids on the other side. So first, I want to check, this is my coolant reservoir. They will have a sight glass on them, and I can see that it has fluid, and so that's good. I'm going to look at my washer fluid, and it's got plenty of fluid. If you're low, you could get a ticket for it. You want to look at your power steering. Some may have a sight glass like this one, and some may have a dipstick. But it needs to be, if the engine is cold, at the cold full line. Otherwise, you could be low and you could have some steering issues down the road. I'm going to look at my steering gearbox and my pitman arm for any loose or broken bolts or leaks as well. This is my steering shaft. I'm going to turn it and wiggle it, and also check the condition of grease zerks, because you can really help everyone out, maybe at the shop or yourself, that make sure things have proper amount of grease. I also want to check the drag link, which connects the pitman arm to your steering knuckle. Look at the tie rod ends and make sure each castle nut has a cotter pin through it, like right here. That's your cotter pin. If those are missing and a DOT officer sees it, you'll get a ticket. I'm also going to check the suspension and brake components on this side, from the cam to the slack adjuster, as well as the inside of my wheel where the brakes are. Make sure they're not missing or oil soaked from this hub, because typically if your hub does not have the proper amount of oil in it, your brakes might be soaked because the fluid will have to go somewhere. If it's not leaking on the outside, it'll be leaking on the inside. I'm going to check my oil, and it's always good to keep a rag on you to be able to wipe it clean, and then to reinsert the dipstick, and then check it again to get an accurate reading. I'm going to check my fan. I can see a lot better, and check for cracks, maybe broken fins, because without that properly intact, you could have not the right amount of cooling to your radiator. I'm going to check my air compressor. So I'm going to check the lines, make sure there's no oil leaking out of it, and make sure there's no rub marks on the discharge line going back to your wet tank. I'm also going to check this side of the windshield and my wipers and make sure there's nothing missing. Go ahead and check this rim, these lug nuts, and make sure they're not loose, as well as that hub seal. Check this fender and also your hood latches. You could get a securement issue with your hood if these are not intact. Besides that, now we'll check another piece of the truck. Out the engine compartment. Now I turned on my lights and my four-way flashers, and now I'm going to go do my 360 walk around and check out the rest of the truck, starting from the passenger side and working my way around to the driver's side. So first thing I'm going to see, I got a marker light right here. It's on and visible. I'm going to check out my mirrors, make sure the glass isn't broken, that they're clean, and that there's nothing missing or loose on them. I got a blinker right here and it's flashing, telling me that it's good. I'm going to make sure my cab windows are clean and that anything else that I can see out of to help me see a blind spot that is visible. I'm going to check my doors, make sure they open shut, make sure I have my company logo, DOT number, and VIN number, as well as my IFTA sticker if I need one. I'm going to look at my exhaust system, make sure that there's no leaks, that it's securely attached, and I'm looking for that black soot around any of the exhaust components. You want to make sure that your steps are securely attached and that they're not going to fall away. I'm going to check my marker lights if I have them up top and my reflectors. I'm going to check if I have a door or more steps that they're not going to go anywhere. They're securely fastened. And I'm also going to get down and look underneath to look for leaks, look at my drive shaft, my air tanks that they're attached, as well as my frame members. I'm going to look at the bolts holding stuff to the frame and make sure that there's nothing shiny, loose, or broken. And from this side, I'll also look at my opposite drive tires and my wheel seal and my brakes. It's a lot easier to see it from the opposite side. I see that my brake chamber is attached. My slack adjuster looks like all the cotter pins are where they're supposed to be. I see no broken lines, air lines. Nothing is in the way of getting rubbed or broken. And then as I move this way, I'm going to start looking at my tires, my rear drive tires. You want to look for irregular wear as well. This one has a little bit of cupping. Could be due to rough roads, maybe a bad shock absorber, or something out of the ordinary. You also want to look on the inside of your duals and feel around. Make sure there's no rocks or any obstructions. I'm going to check these lug nuts as well. Make sure they're all tight and they don't look like any of them are loose. I'm going to look at make sure my valve stems for my tires have metal valve stem caps so that no mud or debris can get in there and possibly lose air. And it's nice if you have something a little bit harder to be able to hit the tires to make sure there's not any flat tires. If you have an air gauge, that's even better. You're going to want to look at if you have, like, this wire line is attached to the frame. I want to make sure those bolts aren't loose and that there's nothing going to come off or cause any wrecks. I'm going to look at my mud flaps. Make sure they're securely attached and that there's no chunks or rips in them. I want to also look if I have air suspension at my airbags. I want to make sure they're not cracked, shifted in any way, or look for their mounting points and make sure there's nothing out of the ordinary. And I'm going to move around and make sure my toolboxes are securely latched and that they won't come open down the road. Look at my marker lights and my reflectors and move to the back. If I have anything up top, I want to make sure those lights aren't going to come off or that it looks like they're loose. I'm going to make sure that if I have something to secure cargo, that the mounting points that are fastened securely, as well as checking my lights. My hazards are on. I got the 3 middle marker lights and I got my license plate light. I also look for, make sure the expiration is valid and that my plates aren't expired. If you have a point to hook up a trailer, I want to make sure my trailer plug-in is mounted and that this lid has this little keeper. If that's missing, you can get a ticket for it. I want to look at all tie-down points and anything else that might be attached that could come loose or be broken. You want to look for cracked welds or anything out of the ordinary. If you need a better look and make sure your rear differential ain't leaking, go ahead and drop down. I don't see anything leaking. I don't see this rake. It's not loose, and be sure to shake everything as you go around. As well, I'm going to come back around, make sure my toolbox ain't going to come loose. I got a reflector, my lights on. I see no visible damage on the outside. And I'm going to look at this wheel set. I'm going to make sure there's no leaks coming out of this axle seal, and also check these lug nuts. Check my valve stems and make sure there's no mud, debris in between the wheel set, and look at my suspension components, my hangers, my springs, and as well, since I looked at the other side for this wheel set, I'll look on the opposite side and make sure there's no oil dripping or that everything else is attached. Also look at this frame member going up, as well as the air tanks that might be on this side. I'm going to go around. I've got that marker light on, my reflector on. There's some air components down over here. I don't see anything leaking or loose. I'm going to check my fuel tank. Make sure the cap is securely attached. Make sure the steps are securely attached. And I want to make sure that I have rubber underneath this tank mounting strap. If that is missing, it could wear a hole, and a DOT officer will be sure to find it and write you a ticket and out of service. I don't see anything else going here. I got my IFTA sticker. I want to check also my annual inspection label. This one was done in June of 2018, so I'm good till June 20 of 19. Got my DOT numbers, my VIN, and this, and my company logo. My mirrors look good. They're attached. My window looks fine. And then from there, you're going to go in the cab and do more inspections. Now once I'm in the truck, I want to look at several different things. One, I want to make sure I have all my paperwork. So it's nice to keep it in a binder to be able to keep it all together, and when a DOT officer asks for it, it's nice and easy to give it to them right away without hesitation. So I have my insurance card. I have my IFTA license. I have my cab card, which is basically the registration for this truck. And I also have my annual DOT inspection paperwork. There might be also weight permits and everything, but everything's in here. Next, I want to make sure I have lights and fuses. I got fuses, I got lights, different bulbs, and looks like I'm good to go. I also want to make sure I have my safety triangles, that all three of them are in here. Yep, they're all in here. I'm good to go. I also need to make sure that the fire extinguisher I have, which is over here, has had its annual inspection, its monthly inspection, and that it's securely fastened. I want to make sure my floor is clean, that there's no debris sticking anywhere, or anything that could get in the way of the pedals. So now I'm going to start the truck, make sure I have oil pressure, that my gauges are all working, that my air pressure is building, I have proper fuel, my voltmeter works, and so on. So my voltmeter came on, it's charging because it's above 14 volts. Right now my air pressure is about 110 psi. Fuel is 3/4 of a tank. My oil pressure came up to 70 psi. My water temp's still cold, but as it's running, I'll be able to see that change. I want to look at, make sure my RPM gauge works. I'm going to turn my steering wheel and make sure the proper steering wheel play is there and there's not too much. I want to test my horns. There's the air, electric, or that's it. Air, the first one was electric. I also want to make sure my gear shift is not too loose or that there might be anything obstructing it. I'm going to look at my windshield and as well as test my windshield washer fluid and the wipers to make sure that they are cleaning adequately. You want to check your mirrors on both sides to make sure that they're properly set for the driver. And now that I'm building, you want to make sure your air builds to 125 psi. If you go over 140, that is going to cause air lines to break or rupture, and you need to get it into a mechanic. You want to make sure your defrost works, that it's actually coming out of the vents and that you don't have a blend door stuck or anything. You might want to check your radio to make sure you can get emergency information as well as be able to listen to something. So now I've built up pressure to proper, I'm going to turn it off and do some brake tests. So with the engine off, I'm going to turn it back on, the key on, and I'm going to bleed the brakes down. You want your low air alarm to come on about 60 psi. And the air alarm needs to be audible as well as visible. So it does come on. I'm going to go ahead and bleed it down because I'll have to restart the truck, and then you want your air pressure to build between 85 and 110 psi in 45 seconds. So it's bled down. I'm going to start it up, and then I'm going to put it at rated RPM between 15 and 2000 RPMs to get it to build up in the proper amount of time. My audible alarm came off at 60, and now I'm waiting to see with it at 85 how long it takes to get to 110. Right now it's at 100. $110. And it just turned off at 125. So now I'm going to turn it back off and make sure that I have no air leaks in the system. So with your windows down or doors open, you want to be able to hold your brake pedal down for 1 minute and not lose more than 4 psi. Right now the gauge is not moving, indicating that I do not have a severe enough leak. You want to also make sure you have an audible leak. It is wise to set your vehicle with chocks, push in your parking brake button, and walk around to make sure that you hear nothing audibly. And that concludes the driver's inspection for a Wireline truck.